Hi, I'm Miwa Matreyek. I'm an animator, designer, and performer based in Los Angeles. And as you might have just seen, I make live performances that integrate my animation and my body in shadow. In the live performance is sort of in between cinema and theater. So in terms of what you just saw, it's a piece called Infinitely Yours that I just premiered in January of this year. And I did a preview at MDC Live Arts last November. Of it, and like work with students and stuff like that. So I've been working in this format for like 13 years since I started in grad school. I'm working with a projection screen and a front and rear projection, or front and rear projectors. For this piece, it started with a bunch of paper trees that I had cut out. And I think if you remember the beginning of the live stream, I held it in front of the camera and I moved in the back. And it's on a rotating platform, as you can see here. So the video is just, I just have it on a still frame. But you can see that on the rotating platform, the trees are moving. So I'm kind of in between the space of shadow puppetry and the handmade and the digital as well.
Oh, fantastic. So stunning. Okay, I want to open it up to Keya and then Carlos to ask a question about your work. Take it away, Keya.
Thank you. That was really amazing. The two things that jumped out at me were your physical placement in the center of the earth, and the bringing the baby in to the center of the earth. And I just wonder if you can talk a little bit about what like that decision. And what you were going for with that placement in the center.
Sure. In terms of my shadow in this piece, something I was interested in was kind of my body representing different perspectives. So throughout the piece, sometimes I'm someone in a car, which is a very familiar experience of being stuck in traffic in a car. But then my body kind of immediately shifts into becoming a giant that's digging into the ground and pulling out oil out of the earth, right? So I'm interested in these like constant shifts of scale and symbolism of who my body might be, from an individual to maybe all of humanity to the earth itself. And kind of like being both the destroyer and the destroyed, and the creator and the created, and these kind of like sudden shifts. So for that section where I was in the middle of the earth, in that scene, I was imagining my body as somehow, the perspective or the consciousness of the earth or Gaia. And that sequence, because I'm kind of inside the earth the whole time, that sequence, I'm kind of imagining that it's, as earth, as humans evolve, like, as earth brought forth humans, how quickly the surface of the earth transformed. I couldn't do like close-ups into the screen because it was like a single camera, so maybe some of the details are a little bit lost, but I think you could get the sense of how the surface of the earth, once humanity was introduced, changed from agriculture into industrial revolution, like coal and oil mining, into like cities rising and like filling with trash and pollution and smog, into warfare. And I think just if you think about the evolution of humans on Earth, we're such like a short blip in how much we've transformed the Earth, like so quickly, right? And that's something that I want to kind of represent through my performance and through the visuals in that scene.
Carlos?
Yes. Well, Miwa, first of all, I want to thank you for such an amazing and powerful piece. I had the opportunity to watch the whole piece, and I found myself going through this like really wide range of emotions, right? So at the beginning, I was like very overwhelmed. I was like, oh my goodness. But then I went through kind of like an empowerment phase, and then to kind of really being hopeful at the end. So very intense throughout, right? The whole thing. So it kind of makes me wonder, like, acknowledging those feelings on myself and how wide and different they were. What kind of feedback are you getting from audiences that are able to see your performance?
Sure. So something I wanted to point out is that for this live stream, I made an abridged version of Infinitely Yours. So the full piece is longer. So the full piece has a different ending than what you just saw. That has maybe something that is a little bit more hopeful, but for open for interpretation, it might still be kind of dark.
I saw the whole piece.
Like, sorry, yeah, and I feel like people interpret it different ways too, the actual ending. But I mean, I did make it meaning for it to be emotionally intense for the audience. And I think I just wanted to, you know, just like how in the last few years, like I feel like in the last 4 or 5 years, like of course, climate change has been an issue for a very long time. But in the last 4 or 5 years, I feel like there's become like an influx and a barrage of, you know, all these news articles and information about, you know, the giant wildfires and the Amazon to Australia to flooding. It's just has been like really overwhelming, like especially in the last few years, I feel. I'm not sure if it's just more is being reported or just things are just like getting bigger and bigger and bigger as well. So this piece was definitely in reaction to that and wanting to create these like big barrage of emotions and images. And the piece was made by kind of cataloging all these articles over the last few years and just kind of keeping mental note about, I want to create a scene about fire, I want to create a scene about flooding, I want to create a scene about like, you know, fast fashion and consumerism and just like all the like basically disposable furniture that we make that only lasts for a few years and, you know, you replace it, right? Just all the things that we make and all the things that we take from the earth to like turn into something that is just thrown out. In terms of audience reaction, so unfortunately, because of the coronavirus, I mentioned I, you know, premiered it in January, but I haven't gotten to show it live very much. But from audience reaction, I've had very deep emotional talks with a lot of audience members. I think it does kind of touch into a lot of the guilt and climate grief that people are feeling, which is what I made this piece out of as well, my own climate grief and feeling of powerlessness, but wanting to do something. What can I do? I'm an artist. And I think like the struggle of climate, you know, kind of the climate grief is also part of the process of us living here in this modern society. I was explaining about how there was a little moment of the ocean where I was like kind of drowning in the ocean while the plastic is, you know, floating all around me. And that was stuff that I pulled from my apartment building's blue bin. So it's like literally, you know, plastic trash that I myself and some of the other neighbors have generated and, you know, filming that. And kind of in the process of making this piece, having to kind of reassess my own plastic consumption and the choices that I make. And sort of the struggle of, you know, how do you strike a balance of what is convenient or what is affordable or what is accessible versus like what is, you know, more ecologically responsible. Right? And I just want the piece to kind of like peel back the layers of that and kind of make that like a raw experience for the audience. Sorry, that was a long answer to your question.
So this performance really begs the question around climate anxiety. There's so many items that are flowing and overwhelming, and there's this mood of real despair and of anxiety and of too much over and over again. And so I want to pose this question to Keya and Carlos. First of all, how do you stay sane in response to all the climate anxiety that comes from the constant barrage of alarming news coverage? And how does your organization address this? Keya, can you start us out?
Yeah, so I find that with people who I talk to who don't do this for a living, there's a tendency towards emotions like fear and guilt and helplessness. And I do feel like, and studies have shown this is the case, that when you move into action, you can start to move through a grieving process and start to allow for other emotions to take hold. So for me, the emotion that is in the forefront is honestly like a simmering kind of rage. like it's just a rage about the systems that allow those who are most vulnerable to not only get hit by the climate crisis and that injustice, but also by every other injustice. Like look at New Orleans, look at Detroit, look at New York. These are places that were hit by you know, lack of water, clean water, by Katrina, by Sandy. You know, the systems are set up to hurt the people who are most vulnerable and set up to make those people vulnerable. And so I have kind of less of an anxiety, but more of an anger. And I find that for me, that moves me into a place of action. But I honestly had to go through a lot of grieving. And I found that, like, for me personally, a lot of the stuff that I have personally had to do to work through letting go of things and facing climate change have helped me enormously in this, you know, COVID-19 crisis, because there are things I let go of long ago that now other people are having to deal with suddenly, and see as like a temporary thing. Whereas I see it as like nothing about normal was normal. None of it was okay. People were being poisoned. People were dying. It was just glossed over, and we were in this kind of haze about it. And so I guess that, like, for me, a lot of it is like the new systems we want on this planet are systems that take care of us and take care of people, where we take care of each other. And so we have to allow room for self-care. We have to sometimes start, you know, give people space to take that space and care for themselves, and not be in a constant work mode, but actually think about taking care of each other, because that's the kind of world we want. And we got to get away from the world where it's everyone for themselves, and get into the world where we take care of each other, which means we actually have to proactively take care of ourselves. And I just want to thank Miwa again for doing this, because I think that the role of culture and arts in doing this is absolutely central in helping us move through grief, and also helping us imagine what can be. And imagine another future. And so I actually think that artists are helping others through this more necessarily than activists are.
Wow, thank you very, very much. And Carlos.
Yes, so, well, you know, as you mentioned at the beginning, we are an organization that heavily works with media. So I personally, you know, understand the power of media. I know that they have a huge role to play on making sure that we inform and engage community at a broader scale. So they're a really important platform to do this. With that being said, I believe also that sometimes media, because of the nature of society, of who we are as human beings, sometimes kind of focuses on things that are, you know, that are more focused on fear, more focused on drama, things that are basically sell more. So in that sense, a lot of the information that is put out there nowadays, it kind of focuses on the bad things, on the worst case scenarios, and that is true. You know, that I'm not saying that it's not, but what I'm also saying is that there's a lot of good things happening. So when I talk to individuals throughout different, you know, events and meetings that we do, I always, you know, tell them what I do myself. You know, in order for me to be centered, I always guard myself. I try to be as present as possible to filter the information that is coming to me. Because ultimately it's up to me, it's up to you, it's up to everyone to find that center, to take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. So how are you present in your body, in your feelings, in your emotions, and how you are protecting that space is very important. So the last thing that I will say is that we focus a lot on all the things that we have moving forward, all the positive things, all the solutions that are ahead of us, because I believe also that opens up and brings people into a different state of mind. When we kind of present solutions, we wanna talk and highlight the leadership of our community on different states of the wonderful things that are doing. So always focusing on that, and ultimately it's up to you. It's up to you choosing, what you pay attention to, what actions do you take in order to, to allow yourself to open up, to feel, to go through these processes in order to, to ultimately take action and engage on this space.
Thank you so much. And Miwa, how when the activists, when Carlos and Keya share what their approach to climate anxiety and how this plays into it, what is the role that artists can play in helping the greater community resolve and get through the emotions that are attached to this issue?
I mean, I feel like that's something that I'm kind of finding out as I show the work as well. But I mean, what I want from this piece is to have a conversation, right? And fortunately, when I was at MDC Live Arts last November, that was built into the shows where I was doing workshops with students and having conversations. And I made this piece wanting not just to show it in theaters and to art audiences, but also I was hoping that it could be part of, be useful for environmental festivals or conferences as a way to bring the arts to it, and also, bring a different kind of visual world to it that's maybe not just kind of data information. And I think about my work and my curiosities in making work as kind of illustrating invisible worlds and systems. And sometimes there are things that, in order to see it, you have to tell it through a metaphor, right? Or a symbol. And I feel like the arts could maybe kind of help approach seeing something in a different way, but telling it through metaphor. For example, in one of the moments in there, in the second section, there's a moment where all this trash is pouring out of my body and I'm in a landfill. I'm not sure if anyone remembers that part, but in that part I was thinking about the idea that the average American creates 4.4 pounds of trash a day. And when you multiply that by, billions of people and years and lifetime, it's what does that even look like or feel like? And, if you heard that information, how does it make your body feel? If you imagine just trash pouring out of your body, just everything that you've thrown away and produced and maybe never even thought about, right? So it's about kind of illustrating those kinds of ideas in a very visceral way for me.
Excellent. It's a great segue. So Keya, you literally wrote a book on zero waste. And you help run a 175-member national coalition focused on addressing our climate crisis. How is addressing our runaway consumption central to the fight against climate change? And what does the U.S. Climate Action Network and your many organizations, what are some of the bigger ways that you all take on American consumerism in the fight against climate change?
So I don't know if this is common knowledge about the climate movement, but I do think it's important to share that for most people in the climate movement, it is almost sacrilege to talk about individual actions and what we can do as individuals, because it's very important from our perspective to point out to people that there are relatively few bad actors that have caused this crisis, that there's a relatively small number of people who are, oil and gas oligarchs who are in bed with white nationalists and people who want us to be in a state of constant war, warmongering imperialists. So there's this alliance of people who are preventing us from having the policies we want and wanting the world we want. And let's not blame individuals because they are living in the world that they're in. And so I feel like I need to premise that just so people understand that is kind of the context of the activist community. And I, in some ways, am an anomaly in believing as strongly as I do and in the actions that I take individually. And we are total caricatures of ourselves in my house. We don't have a car. I have a cargo bike. We have solar panels and batteries. We don't buy things with packaging. We're vegetarian. I got arugula growing out back. We're these total caricatures, but I find that every act of doing these things transforms me as an activist. It actually makes me understand better what those barriers are, because every time I pick up every time I take, I don't do this now with COVID-19, but if I go to a restaurant and I take my own metal fork and I realize like what a pain that was and how I had to remember to do that, it reminds me of all the systems that are in place to prevent me from doing that, to prevent me from not throwing away a piece of plastic. And it feels like an act of rebellion to me every time I do it. And it changes who I am, that I constantly am going through these acts of rebellion, of not getting in a car, of not taking that piece of plastic, of not, doing the things that the whole system is designed to force us all to do, even if it is literally killing us. And so for me, it actually, the way that my consumption habits, changing has benefited me has been as much internal as anything else. It's been about self-transformation. And that is why I think people can do it. I think with the COVID-19 crisis, though, we've also seen that there's somewhat of a continuum between what we do as individuals and what we do collectively and policy. And like, we all like, yeah, you need policy, but people gotta go with it, right? They can't revolt against it. Like if you try to ban plastic bags and there's a revolt, they won't stay banned very long. People actually have to, you have to have, what I call a permissive majority and an activist base as well as political leadership. And us getting used to living in certain ways really helps us do that. And of course, and so I'll answer the question directly, which is that like, it's the way, the thing that makes the biggest difference is, the way, what we use in our homes, the way we get around, and what we consume, including food. Like those are the things that have the biggest impact in terms of consumption, but our power as consumers is even more amazing. So like, yes, it matters that we vote, but also we have power that power as voters, but we have power as consumers, we have power as workers, and we have power as taxpayers. And if the system keeps telling us like, no, we refuse to make masks for bus drivers or grocery store workers or the people who are really essential, we refuse to have a livable planet, then we got to use that power as consumers. And that's the most important power, is when we say, okay, well, hello, senators from Georgia, you don't want to support a Green New Deal? Well, guess what? We're using our consumer power to boycott your biggest brand in Georgia, and we're calling for an international boycott of Coca-Cola. How's that feel? That is the real power of consumers. And so like, yes, everybody should absolutely do what you can individually, but like, let's get real about the consumption that matters. And that's when we're in solidarity and using our power as consumers.
Outstanding. Thank you so much, Keya. Okay, so my next question is for Carlos. You co-founded and currently direct Sachamama, which employs art and culture as its main vehicle for community transformation. How have you used art and culture and influencers to shift hearts and minds and policy on issues that we need it shifted the most?
Well, yeah, so when we talk about culture and we talk about arts, there are kind of three things that are important for me to kind of highlight here. The first one is that, as we were talking before, like it's clear that people live in culture. People live in music, in dance, in food, in movies. That's where we are all the time. Not that many people live in the political arena. So it is imperative for us in doing our work to make sure that we go where people is, to make sure that we are there and that we start planting those seeds right where they are, as a way to start mobilizing them, where we want them to go. The second thing that is important to highlight is the fact that that the art and the culture allow us to enter spaces in a different state of mind that usually we wouldn't do. A clear example is what I was sharing about this piece of Miwa, that it just got me into this whole emotional, state that potentially or otherwise I wouldn't be there. So by me accessing this type of information through my emotions, it makes it a lot more impactful. And then I also, it really allow me in this case to get in touch with myself, because we are in a society that really praises the rationale and kind of doesn't praise that much the emotions. And I think that the power of culture, the power of arts is the fact that it allows us to connect with our emotions. And that is from there that we're able to really get the the passion and the energy that we need to really move the things that are important to us. So with that said, that's kind of one of the things that with that mindset is one of the reasons why we engage on with actors, with influencers, with musicians, with poets, with reporters, to anyone that wants to come on this platform to tell their story. Because we also believe that, you know, the community in general, they have different entry points to this issue. So we gotta be able to provide as many entry points to this issue or conversation as we could potentially have. I could be, you know, a science guy, which I am, then I enter through that space. But I know that my wife, she's an artist, she's gonna enter through that space completely different from the space that I am in. So if I'm not able to opening that door for her to enter, then I am losing that opportunity to have a completely new story, a completely new voice, and a completely new movement that really represents, you know, the realities, the concerns, and the interests of everyone rather than few.
Okay, excellent. And Jenni has a question for the group.
Hi, Miwa. Nice to talk to you again. You mentioned being here in the fall and working with students, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how, as an artist working with different populations, comes from a different place or doesn't come from a different place of intention in what you do. And also, I'm really curious to hear you reflect a little bit on what you got from working with the students here in Miami.
Mm-hmm. I think in terms of what I got, it just kind of reaffirmed how important the conversation is as part of the show, not just showing and leaving, right? To have the post-show talk and, you know, especially for universities, you know, Jenni, you were really great with setting up a bunch of like smaller shows for classes that came, and we had like one-on-one conversations with a small group. And, you know, I was talking about, you know, like metaphor and symbolism as a way to experience or think about something. So one of the workshops, it was really interesting to kind of invite the students to think about the ways that they feel in their daily life, how they intersect with elements of climate change. And of course, it was based in Miami, where the school is. So a lot of the students were talking about ocean level rise and also all the pollution they were seeing on the beaches. You know, some it was about, you know, their choices of commuting to the school because it's there's several campuses for MDC Live Arts, or for the college. So it's kind of interesting to get their kind of like local perspective of what their concerns are, and also how that makes their body feel. And we had an exercise of like kind of drawing, you know, kind of creating these drawings and talking about, you know, sort of, you know, not just like the idea of ocean level rise, but how it makes their body feel. And I guess that's kind of, you know, could be in the fear and anxiety kind of field too. But I think again, it's, you know, these layers of things that are kind of covered over or you don't think about. And I think kind of like there's something about kind of bringing that out and you know, thinking about it together and having a conversation, finding kind of similar stories with your peers and, you know, people who are locally in the space with you, right? Can't remember if there was the first part to the question.
The first part of the question was just sort of maybe an overview of what it's like to work with so many different kinds of populations and what the experiences are, perhaps even generation to generation, and concerns and anxiety. Like is there more of an understanding of what's happening among certain populations in order for there to be more anxiety?
Yeah,
which is not necessarily a good thing.
Well, I mean, as I said, you know, I haven't been able to show this work very much, so I haven't really gotten out to take like a wide sample of audience. And I think definitely the Miami-Dade College one was the most integrated experience I've had with the show. So I really, again, thank you and the Live Arts crew for getting that organized. I think it kind of really showed like a new layer of how I want this show to function outside. But I also think that, you know, like arts audiences, when I have performed in, you know, not college spaces, are pretty self-selected as well. So I think they are coming from, like, they are often like very emotional people, and, you know, some people like come up crying after the show and stuff. So, you know, like I do feel like I am in a lot of ways reaching audiences that are kind of more emotionally open and you know, maybe kind of more like troubled about environmental issues too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the it's clear that the emotions are really heavy in this work and in your piece, but also in the work around climate change. And we've moved into a very, very heavy and anxiety producing moment with COVID. And so I wanted to pose a question to Keya one more time, and it's just to think in this new changed environment that presents all its own new anxieties and all its own issues, but there's also this new opening and kind of a remaking of the world that's happening at this moment. And so what might each of you, and we can start with Keya, see as some of the new opportunities on the horizon that we're even beginning to grab and remake this world in the way that we need it to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing, getting back to this conversation we were just having about anxiety and fear and the arts, and for me, the problem isn't that people feel fear and anxiety. The problem is that they're used to dealing with that by ignoring it and turning their mind to something else, and they don't have the tools with which to actually deal with it. And that's why I think this piece is so important, because it gives you kind of like tools to experience that anxiety you know, with others, and acknowledge it. And I think that, like, as a society, we are kind of going through some of that right now, some acknowledgement that, like, whoa, this is hard, and what we called normal was not normal. And it's in that process of like group realization that we can imagine the thing that we actually need on the other side of this, the world that makes it so it isn't you know, the most marginalized people, indigenous people, black and brown communities that are being killed at every turn. And so for me, the opportunity here is the ability to reimagine the way we interact with each other and this planet. And I see an incredible amount of opportunity coming out of this for solidarity, as people realize, and it really hits home to us, who are the essential workers, really? Who are the most important people? You know, Carlos was saying, you know, we value the brain. You know, the most important people are the cashiers at grocery stores, the bus drivers, the people who grow our food, and they always have been. And that group realization of that is, I think, gives me incredible hope for us imagining a new future.
Thank you all. Oh, I'm sorry, Carlos, were you going to say something?
Yeah, briefly, I just want to say that it makes me feel that almost we are in a point that, you know, the planet itself is kind of pointing us in that direction inward. You know, like you were saying, Keya, like, oh, we a lot of the times just, if it's too big, if it's too complex, we just ignore it. Now they're like, you know, shut your door and look inside and start reimagining your role, you know, when everything comes back to normal. And the reality with this is that this is an opportunity really for us, because, you know, it's not the first and it's not going to be the last challenge that we're going to have. When we talk about the climate crisis, we're talking about, you know, we're going to spend over $100 trillion in the next 10 years worldwide on this issue. So this should be seen as an opportunity to prepare ourselves, to be more resilient, to reimagine what is it that is possible. But everything starts within. Everything starts with our role. What is my thing? For me personally, I have been able to reevaluate really what is really needed in my life, you know, and what I have come to realize is that, you know, a lot of the things that you believe are needed are not. You as a human being could live with so less that, you know, we currently live with, if we just change our attention or point it into the things that are more important. that this crisis has allowed us to like family, like friends. So yeah, I see it as a great opportunity, and I see it as a great opportunity for transformation. And that transformation starts with me, and it starts with you, and it starts with everyone before we go out into the world. So in a way, I believe there are a lot of good things that are going to come out of this reality that we are living now.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Carlos. Miwa, would you like to take a brief moment to respond to the COVID question as well in your as you practice and the issues?
I mean, I agree with everyone, everything people are saying. And I think also like this moment is really making us reassess what's important, and also kind of peeling away the illusion of these narratives that we've been told about what we should want, what we should need. I mean, brands depend on these kinds of narratives, right? And then in this moment where kind of everything is taken away from us, it's very clear what's really important. It's like family, the friends that you just want to see so bad and go on a picnic with, like, and I really hope that it's a time where, sort of the materialistic kind of things can fall away, and hopefully we are able to kind of see through it more because we're in this different state.
Thank you so much. Thank you.